There's a lot of talk these days about cultural stagnation. They call it stuck culture. People point out that movies are all sequels and everything is recycled IP. Or in pop music, pop stars don't really have the same resonance as they used to. There's no, song of the summer, as people say. I think when people talk about cultural stagnation, a lot of times it gets attributed to corporatization or, algorithms and people being fragmented on social media, which I think is true. But I think what you're really seeing when you think about cultural stagnation is not a lack of creativity, but the natural limits of a medium. And I think the problem is that when you confuse these things and when you attribute it to a lack of effort, you end up putting the blame in the wrong place, which is a lot of what causes the current state of negativity that is in the air. But I think you really have to understand what it feels like to reach the limits of a thing, because unless you're aware of it, you're just going to blame yourself. In fashion, for example, people point out that fashion has kind of stopped evolving. If you look at a picture of how people dressed 15 years ago, it looks pretty similar to how they dress now. Whereas if you went back to 1975 and then you went back again to 1960, people would be dressed radically different. It would be a visual, it would be a particular visual style that would be distinct between these generations, which has largely stopped happening. And I think some people see this and they think that fashion designers have just run out of ideas and that they're not trying enough and that, fast fashion, H&M, Zara kind of stuff has just fried our visual imagination. But I think what's really happening now, and it's hard to really pinpoint exactly when it happened, but at some point, we just ran out of ways to put clothes on a body. Because that's what fashion is that fashion is limited to the human form. And the human form is not changing. Fashion clothes have to go on a human body. A human body is, 2 arms, a torso, and then legs. There's only so many ways that you can fit clothes on that shape. If you think about throughout human history, people have kind of figured out different ways to put clothes on a body. A dress, some sort of toga, or, eventually people got to pants and then a suit. And, there are different ways you can clothe a person. But clothes have to fit on a person, and the person, for it to actually be fashion, it has to be wearable, and they have to be able to get up and move around. What ends up happening instead of when you cycle through all of the different shapes that clothes can take, yet you still want to be creative, what ends up happening is like the Met Gala, or like, high fashion, Paris Fashion Week kind of stuff, where someone is trying to create a style that isn't practical to the human body. They're starting with what you end up with is a costume rather than an outfit. You have somebody at the Met Gala wearing a gigantic dress that's made out of pipes or something. You have Andre 3000 wearing a piano on his back. I think it's easy to see the Met Gala. People get excited every year, and it almost feels like you're looking into the future. Like, that's what people are going to wear someday. We're all going to be dressed wearing this crazy stuff. But it's not. Because, look, people still got to get dressed and go about their day. They got stuff to do. You got to be able to walk around in your clothes. And practically, there's only so many ways that somebody can be dressed and still be able to function in human life. And as if you are a, fashion designer kind of person, you have to respect that. That has to be early in your decision process is this practical? Because if it's not, then you're not even really doing fashion anymore. Then you're just doing a costume. Then you're not designing for the human form. So fashion is limited in that way. You can change the colors and you can make the fit slightly different, but what you end up with in fashion is not invention, but cycling. Pants get big, then they get skinny, then they get big again. You can if you try to think what else could pants look like, there's not that many shapes because pants got to fit on legs and legs look like legs. Some people's legs are big, sometimes they're skinny, but they do take a specific shape. So the sandbox is not unlimited here. That's fashion. If you think about in music, anybody out there, if you write music, if you've learned basic music theory in terms of harmony and modes, scales, you know that you are working in a limited sandbox. It's interesting when you first learn how to play music, especially trying to learn how to write music. You're making beats, you're, garage band, and you're learning how to put together chord progressions. When you first sit down at a piano, it feels overwhelming. It feels like you're looking at this big, I got a keyboard back there. You're looking at, an 88 key grand piano and you're thinking, what am I going to do with all these notes? This is overwhelming. But when you learn more, you realize there's not 88 notes. There's 12 notes. Those 12 notes repeat up and down the keyboard. You learn about chords and, first C major, and you learn about C major, A minor, and you learn basic chord progressions, 1, 4, 5, kind of major and minor chord progressions. And it feels like, I have all of these things I can do now. And it feels like the world is expanding. But then there's another level you reach when you really start breaking down common chord progressions in pop music. You realize pretty quickly that the sandbox is not unlimited. You don't have hundreds of chords to choose from. You have 7 or 8 chords in any given song. Most likely you only have about 5 or 6 of them, and variations thereof. And when you actually start going through the history of pop music, you realize that every chord progression has been done thousands of times. There is no musician today who can honestly say that they've created a chord progression that's never been done. Because our ear has evolved through culture to accept certain chord progressions and certain melodies as being satisfying, as being pleasing to the ear. You can get more, complex, and you can get avant-garde with it. You can start playing jazz chord progressions. Now you're getting into ninth chords, sus chords, dissonance. And you can get abstract and start playing 12-tone music, and you can get, very high level and abstract with it. But once you start getting into abstraction and you start getting into complexity for its own sake, what you lose is emotional resonance. You lose immediacy because the emotion of pop music comes from simplicity. It comes from hearing something and immediately feeling it, not having to stop and think, what is this person doing? So if people get into playing jazz or prog rock or whatever, and that's usually, it's for musicians. Usually it's kind of, people go through a phase usually when they're young, when they really want to reach technical brilliance and they get into playing very sophisticated music. But any musician who's gone through that phase knows that you start losing people because at that point you're playing for yourself and for other musicians more so than trying to communicate an emotion to an audience. What you're doing at that point, similar to fashion, is you're basically wearing a costume. You're not expressing directly. You're focused on the form itself and not a practical objective. So much like fashion, what seems like an unlimited open sandbox is actually limited. The sandbox is limited. It is deep in the sense that there is no end to human expression. But from a practical standpoint, there's only so many chord progressions you can use. And all the good ones have been done a bunch of times. Pop music, as we currently understand it, basically starts in like the 1950s. People start playing rock music. And it's progressed throughout the decades, and it's looped back on itself a few times. But the basic structure of pop music, verse, chorus, bridge, and minor and major chord progressions, these have all been done. Anybody making music now, you are, even if you don't realize it, referencing things from the 1950s and the 1960s. You can't help it because that's just what we have to work with. In music, anybody who makes, if you make music in like on your computer, you make beats, you know that if you start at 70 BPM and you start speeding up and you go from 70 to 80 to 90 BPM, you'll feel yourself going through different eras of music. And then at a certain point, you'll hit 140 and you'll realize 140 BPM is 70 BPM. You're just in double time now. And there's no other numbers. There's only a certain number of BPM that you can reach before music becomes incomprehensible. So all you can do is double back. So that's music. Think about housing. In housing, all the good real estate has been taken. All of the desirable places there are to live, there's already somebody living there. You want to move to New York City and you want to live in Brooklyn somewhere. It's like, guess what? There's already somebody there. Whatever apartment you want to live in, it might be vacant now, but someone's going for it. A whole bunch of people want to live in New York City and in LA, Austin, Chicago, wherever. These places have been built up. New York City is hundreds of years old. So all of the prime real estate, all of the desirable locations to live, somebody has been living there for a long time. And the reason you want to live there is the same reason they want to live there. It's because it's nice. People talk about the housing shortage. There is not really a shortage of housing on a technical level in this country. It's just that all of it is located somewhere that you don't want to live. It's all located somewhere where there's no jobs and you're in the middle of nowhere and you can go to Walmart or something, or you can work at an Amazon fulfillment center. But if you want to live somewhere nice, guess what? You're going to have to fight for it. And that is the current predicament we're in, because nobody wants to live in the middle of nowhere and work at Amazon, because that sucks. Housing is even more, it's a physical thing. So it's much easier to comprehend limitation as opposed to music or fashion. But it is the same limits. It's the same feeling of, look, you can go out there and be on your own if you want. But to be a part of culture, like in music, it does require doing what everybody else does, because that's where culture comes from, not from being by yourself in the middle of Alabama somewhere. The problem is when people don't acknowledge limitation, what they end up doing is fighting with each other. And you end up having arguments where somebody says, oh, they don't make music like they used to. Back in the day, people used to be creative and they used to make new things, where nowadays everybody just copies stuff. It's all samples. Nobody's making Sgt. Pepper's anymore. And that's true. But that's not because people aren't trying. And it's not because they have nothing to say. The problem is that you're thinking about time itself being the problem. Early always comes before late. We can't help the fact that we weren't around in the 1960s to make pop music when it was still fresh, when chord progressions hadn't been done a million times, and the sonic field was still open. You have these stupid generational arguments online now about people blaming baby boomers or whatever for buying up all the good houses. It's like, what were they supposed to do? Not get a home? It's like, no, you're mad because they got there first. You would have done the same thing. Fashion has stagnated because what else are pants supposed to look like? Pants got to fit on legs. There are natural limits to all of these things. And it's not to say that we can't make music. And that's not to say that everybody's got to be homeless and that you can't have fun with your clothes. But I think to actually progress, we have to be honest with ourselves about where we are in time. And you have to acknowledge the fact that it's not the 1960s anymore, and that houses are expensive now. And the fact that young people can't afford a house is not a lack of effort. Houses cost millions of dollars now. The fact that you can't afford a house, it's not because you ate too much takeout food. It's because someone already lives there, and that person wants a lot of money for them to move out. My point is not that we have to give up. It's that we can be more thoughtful about what it is we're actually working with. Like I'm saying, music has depth. You don't have to invent a new scale to express yourself. The fact that you're using a chord progression that's already been used, that's fine. You have to acknowledge that that is part of the deal and still find a way to express yourself within the limited sandbox that you've been given. The irony is that there are certain forms that are not limited. You think about literature or, visual art, painting on a canvas. There is no actual physical limitation to what a novel can be. It is an open universe. There is the limit of comprehensibility and craft and telling an interesting story. But that is pretty vague. That's not the same as a chord progression or, a chromatic scale in music. And visually, a painting can be anything, whatever you want it to be. What's funny is that these things, the most open and infinite mediums, are the ones that are dying off. Not because they've reached their natural limits, but because people don't care. Because their attention spans are too fried to sit down and read a book. They're too anxious to paint something and express themselves in a form that doesn't tell you what to do. Painting a painting is not like playing a video game where there's buttons and there's rules and an objective. The objective is whatever you want it to be. And I think that is daunting to people who are used to working within a certain framework. But if you are frustrated by culture and you feel like you want to go to a new place and expand into a thing that doesn't have limits, literature and art, that is a very good place to start, because these are things that reward attention, that reward sustained concentration and thoughtfulness. If you read, especially classic literature, you read Dostoevsky, you read Moby Dick, you can read those books again and again. You're always going to find new stuff. It's not like trying to dissect, an Avengers movie where there's just not much there. Pick up a good book and there is a lot there. There's always going to be more. And there's a whole universe of things to explore. And if you do feel so motivated and you sit down and write your own book, you write your own great American novel, you can write anything. Whatever is in your head, that can be the novel. And there is no limitation to what that can be.